Hello and welcome to today's broadcast. I'm Davina. I'm an Australian living in the United States who broadcast a mildly viral video in 2018 warning that Donald Trump was leading a totalitarian aspiring regime and that totalitarian regimes don't stand for free and fair elections for long, if ever. 2018, some prescience for 2021, January the 6th, attempted overthrow of the Democratic government with a violent mob incited by Trump and his co-conspirators being but one arm of an attempt to abuse the Constitution, abuse America's tolerance of pro-Trump protesters, to overturn the standards upholding democracy, to uphold those fragile and often conceptual barriers to tyranny and despotism. Now, some people may know from my previous broadcasts that I point people to the 12th Amendment because there's a provision in there regarding presidential elections, and that provision shows that when there's a inconclusive result to an election, the election results are then put in the hands of one delegate from each state within the House of Representatives. And that this would have led to Republicans having a majority of delegates, 26 delegates relative to 24 Democrat delegates from Democratic-led states, and that could have resulted in an alternate result for the 2020 election if that provision of the Constitution was inappropriately deployed by Donald Trump, whose every effort was in furtherance of that goal, declaring the actual results of the election null and void, overturning Joe Biden's electoral college victory, as well as popular vote victory by a 7 million margin, and declaring himself the winner. Because totalitarians, authoritarians, all different words for people who grab power to give themselves advantage at the expense of others. So not democratically conferred power. They want to abuse and twist and subvert democratic mechanisms for their own profit and importance. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about Clarence Thomas and Joe Biggs. Now, Clarence Thomas, I'm going to play a little extract from Fox News. It's incomplete in its discussion of the facts because the people employed by Rupert Murdoch to talk on Fox News are typically people who work in furtherance of the conservative conspiracy to make to give them power, again, at the expense of other people. And the people they want to give power are the kind of billionaires who showered Clarence Thomas, corrupt Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, with luxury vacations and trips on private jets, and will continue to defend that even as the defenses become increasingly ludicrous and as reality increasingly intrudes on that fabricated image of conservatives as being patriotic, party of individual responsibility, party of fiscal responsibility, all nonsensical claims because they're not backed up by facts. The Republican Party has presided over significant economic failures, 10 out of the last 11 recessions in the United States since World War II, and you can cheerfully and easily look that fact up. Republicans in the office of the presidency are not good for the United States economy. So let's just have a quick listen to how they try to justify Clarence Thomas being gifted a lot of very expensive holidays, as well as a property purchase that was made by billionaire Harlan Crow. He purchased Clarence Thomas's mother's home in 2014, and Clarence Thomas failed to declare that on his required financial disclosure forms. ProPublica discovered that this year. So recently, Clarence Thomas has declared those purchases and says, yes, inadvertently, I failed to disclose that my mother's home had been purchased and that she now lives there. Well, I don't know if he did disclose the part where she now lives there rent-free and has done so since 2014, that home is owned by billionaire GOP donor Harlan Crow, but that Clarence Thomas's mother continues to live there. So not only was the purchase made and improperly concealed or improperly excluded from those financial disclosure forms, but also it was not disclosed that his mother lives there and doesn't pay rent. Clearly an improper relationship. And whilst this commentator on Fox News claims that there were no cases that Harlan Crow had before the Supreme Court specifically, there have been cases in which billionaire interests have been at play. For example, there's lots of cases that have helped accrue more tax benefits for wealthy people and reduced and cases which attempted to reduce the cost of supporting and maintaining America's infrastructure, which is paid for by taxes. So any anti-tax cases before the Supreme Court go to benefit Harlan Crow and his ilk. Any anti-workers' rights cases benefit billionaire Harlan Crow and his Republican donor ilk, billionaire ilk. They benefit Peter Thiel, David and Charles Koch, Robert Mercer. Billionaires' names that we need to familiarize ourselves with just so we know the people exerting inappropriate pressure, exerting inappropriate influence, buying influence with the Supreme Court. Playing the clip.
About all this.
Yeah, breaking news. Clarence Thomas has some wealthy friends who have occasionally been generous to him over the years. And, John, I just think this narrative has been just so relentless against Clarence Thomas because there's really only one fact that matters if you cut through the noise. And it's that Harlan Crow and all of these friends in question had no business before the Supreme Court. Full stop.
Except they did. If you look in a big picture sense and say their personal pocketbooks were enhanced by victories that the conservative stacked Supreme Court, and I say stacked because I mean inappropriately stacked. Mitch McConnell deprived President Obama, then President Barack Obama, his right to select a Supreme Court replacement, a Supreme Court nominee. He blocked even hearings of Merrick Garland when Obama sought to appoint him to the Supreme Court, paving the way for Amy Coney Barrett to be rushed through with her appointment in the weeks following Ruth Bader Ginsburg's death, as early voting had already started for the 2020 presidential election, showcasing Minority Senate Leader Mitch McConnell's entirely deceitful argument that he was blocking Merrick Garland's nomination hearings because it was an election year. It was 136 days till the election of 2016, and Mitch McConnell inappropriately, potentially illegally, blocked those nomination hearings on that faulty premise of it's an election year, so we can't possibly allow the Democratic President, Barack Obama, to nominate a Supreme Court judge and a Supreme Court justice. So how many weeks before the election was Amy Coney Barrett's nomination rushed through? No weeks, because early voting had already started. It was perhaps 2 weeks till the date of the physical in-person election. So she's lying about that.
And as long as they didn't have business before the Supreme Court, that absolves him of any perception of wrongdoing?
I think, again, if you look at the facts here and...
Yes, let's look at the facts, except she's not going to. She's going to give a highly distorted, incomplete, inadequate version of the facts.
The fact that he had some wealthy friends who occasionally hosted him.
Occasionally. On multiple years over a 20-year period.
On, say, a nice vacation or paid at one point one tuition payment, two tuition payments.
His nephew, whom he had effectively adopted as his own child, and the tuition was at a private school, a very expensive private school. These are substantial sums of money. These are bribes. Clarence Thomas was required to disclose payments made to him. He did not, revealing that legal element of consciousness of guilt, because maybe one slip, you could say, was inadvertent. You cannot look at this pattern of accepting money and accepting gifts, significant, valuable, luxurious gifts, and say it was all just a few oopsies.
That's what we're looking at. And even by the way, even if they had business before the Supreme Court, that's not even automatic.
So we're not just suggesting he should have recused himself. The suggestion is you should not accept these gifts as a Supreme Court justice. You should not be accepting gifts of $100,000 value if you are someone who has to make rulings that affect the entire country, rulings of great significance. So federal employees have told stories of not being able to accept meals from people, of not being able to go out and accept anything over, like to return small gifts because it was deemed to be inappropriate and a violation of the rules governing federal employee ethics. So Clarence Thomas is still an employee of the federal government, of the branch of the federal government that's of extreme importance to the day-to-day lives of Americans. If people don't feel personally attached or connected to the Supreme Court, you can see how your daily life is influenced by it. If you're a woman in the present moment and you live in a Republican state where your federal protections, your federal legal protections governing your reproductive health care treatment has been stripped away by the actions of this man and his conservative colleagues who ended the legal protections of Roe v. Wade for women and girls in the United States, and other decisions affecting workers' pay, workers' rights, the Citizens United decision in 2008, which falsely gave, which twisted the First Amendment to claim that money is an expression of speech and therefore gave permission for wealthy vested interests to pour money into political campaigns as long as they're called PACs, and with no strong enforcement mechanism to ensure that these PACs remain independent of political campaigns. So it was a way to allow masses of money that can't easily be vetted or scrutinized, to purchase the loyalty of politicians who then don't act in a partisan way, or they aren't making things political, they're making things corrupt. And the use of the term, hyper-partisan, or everything's so partisan and divided and political, is ceding territory, is helping to paper over actual corruption, because letting people buy the loyalty of politicians and having that bought loyalty and corrupt influence being peddled primarily within the Republican Party, it's not partisan to call it that if conservative Supreme Court justices opened those channels of influence to nakedly corrupt dealings. It's not political, it's not partisan, it is corrupt. And using the word political or partisan helps make it just sound like an equal disagreement between friends, or it normalizes corruption. Oh, that sounds like the basis of an article that I should write. It normalizes corruption to call these exposés political, or a result of division. They're not a result of division. They are a result of corruption gaining sway within the American political system as consequence of this corruption initiating within the Supreme Court. I'll just hear the final few seconds of what this lady has to say.
cetera, et cetera. So I think really what this is about at the end of the day is knocking Clarence Thomas out, specifically with respect to 2024.
Interesting. I believe it was South Carolina. What do you think about all this?
Yeah, breaking news.
What did you say, knocking him off his
with
perch?
respect to 2024.
I believe it was South Carolina.
Thomas received $12,000 from George Mason Antonin Scalia Law School. Yeah, that's still relatively minor in relation to all the other things he's received from billionaire Harlan Crow.
So I think really what this is about at the end of the day is knocking Clarence Thomas out, specifically with respect to 2020.
Knocking Clarence Thomas out specifically with respect to 2024. You mean undoing some of Donald Trump's handiwork? I mean, Donald Trump didn't elevate Clarence Thomas to the Supreme Court. I imagine that was George Bush. But in any case, I have to go. So thank you to those who've watched today. Once again, I think my take-home concept for today is that we need to articulate why it is a corruption-enabling move to use the term political to describe corrupt activity. It is enabling corruption to describe corrupt activity, or the consternation over corrupt activity to be partisan division. It is not partisan division when it is outrage over corruption. The mere fact that corruption is at the present moment in history concentrated in the Republican Party is a product of this moment in history, a product of partisan emotion. It is not a result of cheering for one team over the other team. It is a result of a cognitive process of identifying and calling out corrupt behavior. And America has suffered a great deal, and American families continue to suffer the consequence of corrupt dealings of the Supreme Court, or those conservative actors on the Supreme Court who have accepted luxurious gifts from gun lobbyists and other wealthy vested interests, people with a vested interest in profiteering on the suffering of others, profiteering from the over-availability of guns in the United States, families who have had accidents, suicides, homicides, been victims of mass shootings, or been emotional victims of mass shootings, all those children currently participating in lockdown drills and other traumatizing events where they have to conceive and engage emotionally with a world that is not safe for them. It's a deprivation of their fundamental right to both physical and emotional safety in their place of learning at school or at universities, or even other public spaces such as cinemas, places of worship, because mass shooters who have benefited in their murder escapades from over easy access to guns without adequate legislation, all predicated on a misinterpretation of the Second Amendment pushed by Justice Antonin Scalia, who distorted the Second Amendment, which clearly refers to a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state. The right of the people to bear arms shall not be infringed upon. That Second Amendment refers to what's referred to in the first clause of that sentence, the foregrounded clause, a well-regulated militia, i.e., if you're in a state militia or the actual militia of the United States, that is to say, the armed forces, you should be allowed to possess weapons, because it is necessary to the safety and security of a free state to have weapons to be used in the defense of that state against insurrection or invasion. Those are the two scenarios in which it is necessary to have guns and to be prepared with weapons. Scalia made it about personal gun possession. It's a distortion. It's not a true reading of the Second Amendment, and there's historical and logical analysis to back up that fact. It's a fact that it's corrupt favoritism from a corrupt justice who accepted luxurious holidays from people within the gun industry to make that decision, which allowed for more widespread proliferation of murder weapons within the United States, resulting in more widespread murder, suicide, gun accidents, resulting in more dead and injured children and adults, and more victims of domestic violence and more victims of improper and careless gun possession, more victims of crime because more available guns, meaning more theft of guns, etc. All right, I've got to go. Thanks so much for listening. To anyone who listens to the repeat broadcast or who listened today, all the best. Take care. Goodbye.